Join the coven. This took place when I was 19 years old. My family was moving to a new house, and I was moving out of state. I had stayed a week longer to help my family get everything moved to the new house before I left. We lived in a very poor neighborhood, the ghetto, honestly. We were used to shady encounters and creepy crackheads around the area, unfortunately. My mother was moving from this area into a very rural country area, as she didn't want to raise my brothers in a dangerous neighborhood anymore. It was July, and we had spent a good 2 weeks loading trucks, throwing things out, moving furniture, and cleaning the house. We had U-Haul trucks and family friends' trucks loaded with our furniture on our dead-end road all week, back and forth. The last couple of days of moving everything to the new house, my mom and brothers began sleeping at their new home. I wasn't too thrilled about the lack of Wi-Fi at the new house. And seeing as it was in the boonies, the cell connection was awful. At the time, my boyfriend and I were long distance, so my cell phone was my only means of connection to him. And I felt the need to be in contact with him all day. I also was having a hard time leaving a house that contained so many memories. That was a mistake. I begged my mom to let me stay alone at the old house as the Wi-Fi was still up, and my bed was still there. I told her I wasn't ready to leave yet. I would finish cleaning it up so she didn't have to. I wasn't comfortable at the new house, etc., etc. Every argument in the book. My mom was hesitant and said no multiple times. She hated the idea of leaving me alone in a near-empty house in a bad neighborhood. Finally, I convinced her. I reminded her that my uncle lived just down the street, a 3-minute walk. I told her if anything happened, I would call him. He was reliable and always up at crazy hours. My mom finally agreed. Around 8 p.m., my family set off with another load of boxes and headed to the new house for the night. I was completely alone. I laid on my mattress on the floor for a while, and I distinctly remember watching Catfish for at least an hour or two. I eventually got up and took a shower and put on my pajamas. As I walked back into my room after my shower, I flicked on my bedroom light. I stopped. I heard crunching outside, distinctly the gravel on the side of the house outside my window. I paused, trying to strain my ears to hear something else. I began to convince myself that it was me trying so hard to hear something that my mind was making things up and my senses were overly heightened. I took a small step forward, and what I heard next made my heart very literally stop. The girl, she's still in there, a voice angrily whispered. I cannot describe the fear that flooded my veins with ice-cold intensity. I dropped to my knees. My legs went limp, with fear hearing a voice outside my window. I began to realize how bad this was. I was a 19-year-old female home completely alone at midnight. Bedroom window open. No weapons. I'm sad to say, I completely froze up. The voice spoke again. A second voice. Damn it! Indistinguishable muttering. Go in! Do you have it? More talking back and forth and heated whispering. I was sitting beneath my window with my back pressed against my bookshelf, trying to hide myself beneath the window they stood at. My curtains were very sheer, and I knew they could see in the room. They obviously quickly determined I was still in the house. I heard crunching yet again, this time retreating. I waited until I couldn't hear any more footsteps, and dove on my bed for my phone. I couldn't dial my uncle's number because my hands were trembling so uncontrollably. I didn't think to call 911. I know. But I knew my uncle would get to me lightning fast anyways, as his house was directly down the street. Just as I pressed the green call button to call him, I heard the front door handle jiggle. I let out a scream of pure fear, not remembering if my mom locked it behind her. I stood and slammed my window and locked it. And I heard the door handle stop moving. It was locked. Oh dear God, it was locked. I snuck down the hall to my mom's room and peered towards the front door. I saw a shadow walk past the front window. And then silence. My uncle picked up his phone and I began to instantly cry and beg for him to come over. He didn't ask for an explanation. He was at the door in a minute and out of breath from running. Shaking with fear and adrenaline, I told my uncle everything. He was on high alert and promised to stay up all night in case anyone came back. My uncle also explained to me that a lot of shady characters stake out a house when they see moving trucks. They know the house will be vacant while the family is moving and try to break in and steal anything left while they see the moving trucks are gone. There's also a lot of squatters that take up surveillance on houses being moved out so they can swoop in the second it's vacant. Judging by the fact the two voices called me the girl, my uncle thinks that they had been watching our house the whole time we had been moving things. When he saw my family leave for the night and shut the lights off, they attempted to make their move. Luckily for me, they didn't take it any further and gave up relatively quick, though the fact that they knew I was there and attempted to try the front door still haunts me. So, creepy men standing outside my open window at midnight, let's not meet.
In November of 2016, I finished my military service and ended up moving to the Midwest to work with a buddy of mine from my platoon at his family business. Long story short, that didn't really work out, so I ended up picking up another job with a security company because it was about the only thing my MOS translated to in the civilian world. This company had contracts with various different businesses in the area. After being shifted around a few times, I was finally placed at a spot that worked with my schedule. I wasn't very fond of it. No one in the company wanted to work it either, but it worked with my school schedule, and I really needed the money, so I was just happy to have the job. So there I am, working armed security at a Popeye's Chicken in a very rough part of town. I lived down the street, so it wasn't really that near to me. Just keep to yourself and usually people leave you alone. Aside from the occasional crackhead wandering in from the bus stop, it wasn't too bad. One day I pulled into the parking lot and I'm sitting in my car finishing a cigarette. I noticed a man in a really nice black BMW talking to a group of teenagers. After a short moment, the kids go inside the Popeye's and the guy gets out of his car and is rummaging around in the back seat and pulls out a machete. I kept watching him as he got back into the driver's seat. A few moments later, the group of kids walk out and kinda give him a slight wave. The guy nodded and the group of kids went on their way down the street. I finish my cigarette and pull over to the other side of the building and go sit inside at my usual table. About 10 minutes go by and I'm messing around on my phone, and out of the corner of my eye I see the same guy start walking up to the side entrance. I put my phone down just as he entered the building. Robberies in this area are not uncommon, so my first thought was, oh fuck, this dude is about to try and rob this place. As soon as he walks in, he doesn't pay any attention to the girl behind the register and beelines it straight into the dining area and stops when he sees me. He had his hand on what I would imagine was the hilt of the machete under his shirt, like it was tucked in his pants. I had already stood up at this point, and he was just staring at me. I put my hand down on my gun, and he immediately turned around and took off out of the exit back to his car and drove off. I don't know what his intentions were, if he planned on robbing the place. I figured he would have gone straight to the front counter, but he didn't. He immediately went into the dining area like he was looking for someone. Safe to say that the entire ordeal had me on edge for a few days, that's for sure.
This is a story from my childhood, one of the ones that haunt me to this day. Have you ever seen those memes where it says people react like a criminal when an unexpected visitor arrives on their doorstep? They freeze and drop everything they're doing and throw themselves to the floor to avoid being seen in a window? This is the story of how I became one of those people. At the time, I must have been around maybe 7.5. I was visiting the Midwest, Kansas to be exact, from South Korea, where I was born and raised, just visiting family, nothing major. On that particular night, the adults, our aunt and uncle, and our parents, were going to have a date night. So our parents had ordered us pizza before they left and waited for it to arrive, so we wouldn't have to open the door for anyone. My aunt and uncle had 2 kids, 2 boys to be exact, and their ages were 15 and 8. Like I said before, I was maybe 7.5 at this time. My older sister was 11, and our baby brother was the young tender age of 3. So all in all, we were ready to just have a fun night of games. After all, it wasn't often the cousins got together like this. They lived in the States and we lived in Korea. But we loved each other dearly. We saw our parents out at the garage entryway. They made sure we knew the rules and we could recite them back to them. They also made sure we knew where the telephones were and the emergency numbers to accompany them. It was just going to be a typical night of no parents. Or so we thought. It had maybe been an hour, maybe 2, after our parents had left. We were downstairs in the basement in the playroom or the game room, whatever people like to call it these days. We were down there just watching movies, playing air hockey, things of that nature, just being kids. We weren't being loud or anything like that, and even if we were, it wouldn't be too big of a deal, because the way houses were in Kansas, the basements were built into the ground in case of a tornado. I had gone upstairs with my oldest cousin because I wanted a drink of chocolate milk, and I couldn't reach the cups alone, so we wandered upstairs into the kitchen, which was on the far end of the house. The others played downstairs, continuing their games, and we had maybe been upstairs for 15 to 20 minutes because while I was drinking my milk, my older cousin was making snacks since we were planning to watch a movie. Then all of a sudden, we hear the doorbell ring. I remember my cousin looked at me and told me to stay here because it was odd that the doorbell was ringing. It wasn't late, but it certainly wasn't early, and I say this because it was summer. It was around 8 o'clock. My cousin started to creep towards the door quietly. It was unnerving for someone to be ringing the doorbell. We weren't expecting any guests, and the pizza had been delivered before our parents had even left for the evening. And before he's even halfway to the door, who's ever on the other side starts rapidly ringing the doorbell over and over, the constant ringing echoing throughout the house. And by this point, I had looked over towards the staircase, and I had saw our other siblings starting to creep up the stairs, with the exclusion of the baby, who was still asleep in the crib down in the guest room. The oldest of the kids, let's just go ahead and call him James from here on out, put his finger to his lips and told us to be quiet, to make it seem like no one was home, despite there being lights on. He crept closer to the door as the banging and the ringing on the doorbell continued, and he peeked through the peephole. I had never seen my cousin look so freaked out. His face drained of color, and he backed away from the door rapidly, and he told us all to go downstairs. But of course, we didn't listen. Honestly, we thought he was playing a joke. Maybe it was some of his friends wanting to scare us, since he did cancel his plans that night to stay home and watch all of us kids. My older sister shoved past him and looked through the peephole herself, and for whatever reason, whatever was on the other side of the door made her have the exact same reaction, and she stumbled back from the door, just as pale. At the time, I didn't understand what was going on. I don't think any of us younger kids really did. But something wasn't right. After a while, whoever was at the door stopped ringing the doorbell, and all was quiet again. It seemed like they gave up. Maybe they thought no one was home. If only we knew how wrong we really were. We all sat in silence for a while after this initially occurred. My other cousin, who I'm just going to call Kyle for the purpose of this story, mustered up the courage to ask his brother James, who was at the door, why James and my sister were acting so skittish. James told us that there was a man wearing dark clothes and seems to be carrying some type of package or large box, but he couldn't see his face. Of course, Kyle, being the little smarty pants he was at the time, started to mock James, saying he was just being a scaredy cat and didn't recognize their neighbors. Kyle was convinced it was just a neighbor trying to drop off a package that might have gotten mixed up in the mail, seeing it happened all the time. So, we all agree that was the probable cause, until we realized whoever was ringing the doorbell didn't just leave the package on the porch, which isn't that what most neighbors do? In the case no one answers, they'll just leave it? And why would they try to bring it over to the house at night instead of just waiting until the next day? But we thought it was over and done with, so we pushed it to the back of our minds. We didn't think it was important to call our parents and let them know what had happened. It was over after all. We went back to the kitchen, grabbed the snacks, and started to head back downstairs. Until we heard banging again, but it wasn't from the front porch this time. We were in shock. We froze in fear. I mean, it was coming from right behind us. We turned slowly and looked back in the direction from which we came. We were currently standing in the dining room. We had already passed through the kitchen. It was like someone was banging on the kitchen window. You know the one that's typically above the sink, so your mother or your father can watch the kids while they play in the backyard, while they wash the dishes. So James and my older sister, who we're just going to call Nicole at this point, got down on their hands and knees, and they crawled back into the kitchen, much against our charging. Just as quickly as they crawled into the kitchen to take a peek, they crawled back to us, almost in hyper speed, and they told us to get low and stay low as we crawled into the den further down the hallway. James had us all huddle close to the fireplace, out of sight from all the windows. And he told us to stay there. He was taking charge. He was protecting his home and family the best he knew how. James quickly crawled away. I didn't know where he was going, but I was scared. The banging was getting louder and louder, and it was getting closer and closer. At some point, I started to cry, and I remember Kyle put his hand over my mouth, and my sister was hugging us tight. And around that time, we saw James starting to appear back around the corner, and he had his baseball bat, and he had crawled up another staircase to get to his room. He crawled past us, put a finger to his lips again, And that's when we realized he was crawling towards the doggy door. He was attempting to close off the one entrance to the house that wasn't locked. Thankfully, he managed to do that and get it latched in time, because we don't think the man outside had realized that the house had a doggy door. But when he heard the lock click into place, the banging became more and more erratic, more violent. Then all of a sudden, much like before, the banging stopped. But we heard pacing. Someone was walking back and forth across the porch. Slowly, deliberately, thump, 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 thump. His heavy boots thundered across the red oak porch. And then, without warning, the pacing stopped, and it became quiet, eerily quiet. Then the man called out, "Won't you open the door? I have a package for you." We didn't respond. We stayed quiet, or as quiet as we could be, with the way our hearts were pounding and with how ragged our breathing was. The stranger called out again, "Open the door." And again, we didn't answer. The man called out angrily, "I said, open the door. I have a package." Like before, we didn't answer, nor did we make any sudden movements. The man started banging again, this time directly on the panel window of the room we were sitting in, yelling, "I know you're in there. I know you can hear me. Open the door, or I'll open it for you." Bang, bang, bang. The window rattled and shook violently with each impact from the strange man. Thankfully, our cousin's house has reinforced windows, so they weren't easy to break. But luckily, we didn't have any neighbors close by, so we didn't think anyone could hear the commotion. But while he was making all this noise, we took the opportunity to book it to another room and get to a phone. At one point, while we were on the phone with the police officers, they asked us if we could describe the man, and all we know is that he was tall and wearing black. So Kyle and I decided to be brave, so if something did happen to us that night, they would at least have a better description of who did it. We crawled back into the den. We dared to look out the small corner of the window. We gently moved the curtains out of the way, and lo and behold, the man was still banging. He had moved the shutters off outside the window. They're basically hanging off their hinges at this point, rattling with the wind. We made eye contact with the deranged man, direct, soul-searching eye contact. I don't think before this night I had ever believed, but there's pure evil in the world. But when I looked into the man's eyes, I didn't see a soul. I know it sounds crazy, but those were not the eyes of a human. He was something unlike anything I've ever seen before. Animalistic, maybe the only word I could use to describe it, besides demonic. It was evil, unnatural, and something I never wanted to see again. When he saw us, he smiled a twisted grin that I'm sure he thought was reassuring, and he crouched down so he could get a better look at us, I assume. And then he said, "Don't you want your mail? You have mail. I can give it to you only if you open the door." I remember just grabbing on to Kyle's hand for dear life, and Kyle shook his head no, and he threw the curtain back over the window, and before we even had a chance to move any further, the man started violently banging on the window again. At this point, James had enough. He passed the phone to my sister, and he yelled, "Leave us alone! The police are on their way. You are not getting in here." After that, it seemed like the man panicked, and the banging abruptly stopped. And then we heard rapid footsteps on the porch, and Kyle and I peeked out the window again, and the man was running through the yard, past all the trees, and he jumped the fence, the wooden 22-foot fence, at the end of the yard into the alley that separated the neighborhood from the old cemetery. We stayed on the phone with the police until they arrived, and our parents arrived not long after. But the man was never caught, and we don't know what happened. After that night, he had just disappeared into thin air. To this day, I am now 21. Whenever the bell rings, when I am not expecting a visitor, my heart drops, and I break out into a cold sweat. Mystery package man, let's not meet again.
Okay, so this happened almost a year ago. My GF and I were house hunting, getting tours of different houses with our real estate agent. On one of these tours, my GF and the agent were talking amongst themselves in the living room. I was going through the house, doing my own thing, inspecting sinks, cracks, goblin holes, etc., you know. In order to access the yard, I had to enter through a side door from the garage, as the agent didn't have access to the back door. It had a separate iron fence type door. The yard looked awesome, so I naturally went to go explore the backyard. It was great, a sunroom and a shed with like awesome pebbles going around the perimeter. Cool stuff. Next to the garage door was a fence, which you could see through the kitchen window, which leads into the yard. I'm making my way back into the house through the garage, and I lock it because of people that do crimes. So I'm in the kitchen joining in on the conversation my GF and the agent were having. Then all of a sudden I hear the sound of the wooden fence doors scrapping and shutting. I asked them if they heard anything, which they didn't, of course. I didn't want to freak anyone out, but I stayed on alert, and sure enough I catch movement through the corner of my eye. I saw someone dart across the kitchen window to the backyard. All of a sudden I hear a rattling, and I see a homeless guy in a very eccentric looking bowler hat. Feathers, teeth, you know the works, trying to get into the house, trying to be a sneaky snake. So he starts telling us to let him in because he's a worker and needed to get his son's tools back that he left there earlier. The agent calls the supervisor and it confirms that there was no scheduled work to be done or had been done. The guy keeps shaking the door trying to get in, runs back around and tries the garage side door. Dodged the bullet there. Still can't get in and tries the back door again. If it wasn't for the iron bars, he could have easily gotten in through the glass door. At this point, he's even more mad and keeps trying to convince us to let him in. We make our way to the front door and the guy follows. Now he's blocking the entrance. My GF and the agent, small tiny lady, kinda push it on me to do something about it. So now I go yell at the guy through the window and get him to back off long enough for everyone to get into their cars and haul ass. The entire time he was waiting on the driveway, threatening to call the cops on us for not letting him in. I was already on edge, ready to use the 300 labs of mess I've been cultivating on him. Luckily he saw that it wasn't just two females and didn't try anything. Not sure why he didn't just knock in the first place. If he was serious and really was a contractor, why try and sneak through the back? Why not call and make a legitimate appointment? Needless to say, we didn't buy the house. So crazy homeless dude who turned me off from an awesome yard. Let's not meet again. Hey guys, for those who don't know who I am, my name is HellFire and I'm a German horror narrator. My channel is all about horror and history because I really love both. All from creepy stories to no sleep or true horror stories, I got it all covered. Also, I'm writing some stories in German, but give it my best with English subtitles. Also, historical events with mystic background and something to think about will be coming up once in a while when I can find the time for it, because I need to focus on my last year of college. Thank you guys so much for your support, and we hope you enjoyed it.